No, it's not a James Bond movie. Today we are installing Tortoise switch motors on our Canadian Canyons Project Railroad. All right, you haven't seen this for a while, but this is the underside of our Canadian Canyons Project Railroad. The beauty part is the railroad is small enough that we can still flip everything up onto the sawhorses in order to make working on this area a lot easier. I have spent the better part of my morning today installing these little guys. These are Tortoise switch motors, and we need them pretty much on every turnout that is on our main line and in our staging yard, which is the case here. Several years ago, we made a whole series of videos about installing a Tortoise switch motor on our thin branch HO scale layout at that time, and we showed you how to not only get it attached to the layout, line it up properly, but also to wire it, how to wire a double pole, double throw switch so you could reverse the Tortoise motor from one direction to the other, and how to use these extra contacts on here to power switch frogs. Those videos already exist, so we don't need to cover any of that territory today. In fact, we're going to do something fairly different with our Tortoise motors to power them and operate them anyway. Ben Lake will be in a moment to show us how to do that. However, since we are working at N scale and things are a little bit different this time than in the past, I thought we'd go through the process briefly just to show you how to get the Tortoise assembled and to properly mount it for our Pico turnouts on the top side of the layout. As it comes from the manufacturer, you get a switch motor that looks like this. You get a fulcrum. You get a screw that is used to attach this, which will be our actuating rod once we bend it into shape. And then you get a nice instruction sheet too. Probably the first thing you'll want to look at on the instruction sheet is the back side, where you get this little guy. This is a drilling template. It's just made out of paper from the instruction sheet. But what I've done is I've taken one of those and I've mounted it just to an ordinary piece of styrene, and then drilled out all these holes. And the nice thing about this is you can set it up underneath the layout and mark everything where it needs to go. Now remember, we already cut the slot for the actuating rod to go through the layout, so all I need to do is take my template, line it up, and if you look right through the hole, you can see right through the hole in the switch rod on the top side. So once you've got the hole lined up and the actuating rod is in target there, then basically you come in with your pencil and you mark the holes. Now you can see there's no need to do that because I've already drilled these. But using the template makes short work of getting everything lined up the way it should be to guarantee that your switch motor is mounted under the layout properly every time. Now, before we get into any more work, we probably should just do a quick refresher on how do you put the Tortoise together so that you can install it on the layout. So the first piece we need is our actuating rod, and if we flip our instruction manual back over, you can see right here there is a nice bending guide for turning this into something that looks like this. Coming in with just a straight jaw plier. Actually, these are my spiking pliers, so they've got a nice little groove put into them, but hold the wire something like that. Now you want to bend this over nearly to 90 degrees, not completely, but pretty close to it. We'll bring it in and lay it on top of our diagram here, and you can see it's pretty close. It'll be close enough, I think. All right, next. What I like to do is bring my thumb in right about here and then pinch the wire off. Bring the pliers in to make my next bend. Now this needs to be in line with the first bend, so we'll just set it something like that and give it a little twist. Doesn't need to be too much. This wire is spring steel, so it takes a little bit of effort to bend it, but okay, that's close. Next step is to attach the fulcrum to the Tortoise motor. Now this is just a plastic part that slides into little rails on the underside of the switch motor. Something about like that. To begin with, I like to leave these about halfway up. You can adjust this to increase or decrease the amount of throw of the rod at the top just by sliding it up or sliding it down. In the middle is a good place to start when getting it installed on the layout. Next step is to come in with the actuating rod and just slide it into the fulcrum. And then we've got this little hole at the base of the Tortoise. We just need to slip the rod right into place, like that. Finally, we come in with the Phillips head set screw, set it right in the hole, and then just gently turn with a Phillips screwdriver. Now, you don't want to put too much pressure on this because we are working on top of the moving mechanism, and this is made with just little plastic gears inside, so we don't want to damage anything or strip it. You can see that the threads cut their way into the plastic nicely. Tighten it down, and now our actuating rod is secure in the Tortoise. Now before we put the Tortoise on the layout, we're going to prep it by putting in 2 of the screws that will hold it to the underside of the railroad. These are just number 6 by 3/8 inch pan head screws. And then just bring them up and I want to put them on the bottom two holes, just because those are the two that are going to be hardest to put screws into later. Don't drive them all the way home. Set them something about like that, where they're halfway in. Now you're probably wondering, why am I using 3/8 inch screws here? Well, I've got a 1/2 inch plywood top, and I really don't want to have any chance that the screws are going to come through the top. So smaller screws are better. Now before we install the Tortoise switch motor into the layout, we want to make sure that the lever is centered. This moves very easily just by putting gentle pressure with your finger on it. You can hear the motor whir as it moves back and forth. All right, so that needs to be centered, as well as the switch points and the turnout above. We want to make sure that they are in the center of the turnout also. Now we can slip the actuating wire through the hole in the layout, and by carefully sighting down it, we can run it right through the hole in the switch rod. Get everything lined up here, just like that. And then last but not least, we'll take the tabs, the slots and the tabs on the top of the Tortoise, and then just work them right down into our first set of screws that will mount it to the railroad. And then we can tighten one of them down just to hold it in place so it doesn't wobble around. Okay, you can see that the holes on the top here, this one is okay, this one's a little bit off. That's because the drill bit wandered when I drilled into the knot, you see there. So I'm going to put the screw in the one that is in the right spot first. And then I'm going to carefully lock that one down too. So now my two front screws on the Tortoise are tightened and in the right positions. Now we need to come back and re-drill that hole just slightly. Because the Tortoise is now in the way, I'm going to have to come in on a little bit of an angle here, and I want to drill down and away from the existing hole. Being careful not to drill through the top of the railroad while I'm at it. And then we just come in with the final screw and run it into the hole. Notice I'm using a screwdriver for this operation instead of using the screw bit in my drill, because I need to apply some gentle pressure on these in some cases to get them to lock down, but I don't want to run the risk of breaking these little plastic flanges which hold the Tortoise to the railroad. All right, and just like that, our Tortoise switch motor is now mounted under the layout. Next step, we need to check the points on the other side to make sure that the throw is correct. Okay, you can see here's our actuating rod and our points move freely. I'm going to use my finger to just gently move the lever one direction. Hear the motor run over, and simply by checking our points you can see that they snap nice and tight against the stock rail on that side. We'll flip the lever the other direction, make the other check, and it looks like everything's good. We want to make sure though that we don't have too much pressure between the point rails and the stock rail, because we don't want any deforming of our point rails, which are actually just little thin pieces of metal here. So what I'm going to do is take the fulcrum, just adjust it a little bit by sliding it forward, just to take a little pressure off that side. Now we can move the lever back again just to make sure that we reach all the way to the other stock rail, and we do, and I think this turnout is ready to go. So now, seeing all these wires hanging under the layout and these empty contacts, you're probably wondering, well, how are we going to wire up our Tortoise switch motors for operation? Now normally you'd run a 12-volt power supply to them and use double-pole, double-throw switches wired for a reversing circuit, so you can change the polarity to the Tortoise and make it throw one direction or the other. However, our Tortoise switch motors are going to be an integral part in our operating the layout with a signal system, as well as the control panels that will go on the railroad. And all of those things are being handled by Ben Lake, and he's been working at his secret lab, which is just a workbench over to the side here next to where we're working on the railroad. Let's see what Ben has to show us. All right, Ben, hey. Name of the game today is Tortoise switch motors. I've got most of these installed now underneath the staging yard, and so the question that is on everybody's mind is, how are you planning on powering these things and working them into our signaling system and the control panels?
Well, I'm going to be using DCC switch controllers. In this case, I'm using a Digitrax DS64.
Okay, you've got a test, I see.
Yeah, I've got a test here. Let's just go through how this works in practicality. I've got a button here, and it's basically a toggle from one position to the other, and I've also got it wired up.
Oh, it lights.
Yeah, when it takes a position, whichever one this is, once the turnout's installed, It's either on or off.
Okay, now these buttons will be on the control panel on the layout, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so basically if I want track 1, I just push that button and it's going to line everything up, or is it just going to line one up?
Instead of working just one turnout like we have here, it's actually going to set up a whole route. This is what I'm thinking for the staging yard switch panel. Each of these buttons on the side will be the green buttons that you just saw.
Okay.
And they will select individual tracks. Each button controls several of the switches at the same time. So it's not controlling switches, or it's not controlling turnouts, so much as it is controlling routes.
Right, so if I'm coming in from the west, let's say, and I want to select track 3, I just push that button and you're going to program it using the various modular components to just line everything up so we go right there. All right, Ben, that looks really cool. I can't wait to see it in operation. All right, next question. Normally with these, we would power them off of a bus line of 12-volt DC. And since we're not going to do that here, they need to be powered by this. How does the Tortoise get its power, and how do you switch it?
Okay, on the Digitrax DS64, the first terminal is your track input. This is, right now I have it hooked up to a common 12-volt wall wart, but you can also use track power if you want. Or you also have a regular power jack off the back of it if you want to go that route. The second set of terminals are the switch outputs. As every switch has a pair of connections, either left, right, A, B, however you decide to separate them, it isn't really normal or reverse because it changes per turnout.
Okay, so we have a total of 4 there then, correct?
Yeah, we have a total of 4 switch outputs.
So when we push our switch then, it activates the Tortoise and just flips it over. Let's point this out real quick too. This is a regular Tortoise as they come out of the package. Yours looks very different. That's because you're using one of these. Now this is an Aculite Snap, and this is made to just slip right in on the bottom of the printed circuit board, something exactly like that. And now, instead of having to do any soldering, you've got all these lovely screw terminals that you just tighten everything down. The beauty part is that if for any reason you need to change this Tortoise out or change any of your wiring, you don't have to do any unsoldering. It's just a matter of slide everything right off the Tortoise and away you go. You're going to explain this in great detail, I'm sure, when we get to the video on how to install all this stuff and build the panel and everything else, and I'm really looking forward to that series. That's going to be a lot of fun. In the meantime, I can finish up my Tortoise install into the layout. We can put the Aculite snaps in place too if you'd like, and then it's all ready for you when you come back with the wiring.
Thank you very much then.
All right, cool. Okay, so we've got most of our Tortoises installed now, and hopefully in the next week or two here, Ben will get in here and get everything wired up so we will be able to see our practical demonstration from the workbench over there in operation on our layout. Now, one more project today before we move on to the next thing, and that is, I've got all these little green wires here. And what are they for? Well, they are for powering not only the frogs on our turnouts, but the switch points as well. Let's go take a quick look on the other side of the layout, and I'll show you what we're up to. Okay, the turnouts in the staging yard. We're using Pico large radius or large turnouts. Essentially, that's what they're called. Basically, this is the equivalent of a number 8 turnout. So we've got this frog here, which is fairly big, and all of these rails leading up to it, and then our point rails too. Everything in this section of the turnout, it's all powered depending on which stock rail the point rail touches. So when we're here, the polarity matches this stock rail. When we're back down there, it matches the opposite. Otherwise, all of this is electrically dead. Now, having built a number of different layouts with Pico turnouts before, I can tell you that if you get any type of dirt, ballast, paint, grime, dust, anything else inside these little points, you're going to have some electrical continuity problems. On this layout, to avoid that, especially since we have a lot of hidden trackage here, what I've done is I've soldered in a feeder wire to our frog so that we can power the frog and the turnout point rails independently of whether or not they make good contact on the stock rails that they're next to. Coming back to the underside of the layout now, you can see that I've got all these green wires here. Well, I'm using green for frog, okay? So I have all of my frogs soldered into these. How do we power them? There are a couple of different ways we could do it. One is we could just use the contacts in the Tortoise switch motors. We have another video on MR Video Plus showing you exactly how to do that on our Thin Branch Project Railroad, and that would work out just fine. Now, you've seen this before. We've used it in other videos, but this is a frog juicer. As a matter of fact, this is called a hex frog juicer because it has 6 inputs for 6 different frogs that it can operate at the same time, and that is perfect because it's the number of turnouts that we have in our staging yard on top of the layout. This is used for DCC applications. So as long as you're running a layout with DCC, you can use it to reverse the polarity on well, short sections of track like our switches, or you could use it for something like a turntable too. Since we're going to use it to power all 6 frogs on our staging section, I'm going to put it in a centralized location, and this spot right here is kind of in the middle of everything. So it's got little mounting holes for small screws. So I'm going to just use my pencil here to mark the holes on the layout. Something about like that. And we'll come back and drill those out. A number 4 screw will fit through this nicely, so I'm currently using number 4 by 1/2 inch screws for this project. These are Phillips head screws, so just bring my screwdriver in, line up my first hole, and then gently drive the screw in. Now I want to be careful not to put too much pressure on this printed circuit board because I don't want to damage it at all. The material that printed circuit boards are made out of can crack if you're not careful. Make sure we don't put undue pressure on it. Something like that. Now obviously it's not going to stay because it's only got 1 screw in it. Line up our next screw and drive it home. Okay, our board is now firmly attached under the layout, and yes, I didn't use set-offs to attach this. I don't have any at the moment, and so it'll be fine the way it is. Next up, we'll take our frog wires and attach them right here to our printed circuit board terminal strip. Okay, all of our frogs are now tightly in their barrier strip here, so each one will have individual power. What's this barrier strip for? Well, this is the power that connects to our track bus. We don't have the track bus in yet, but the track bus is actually going to run right through this zone, so we need to put feeder wires in there. And it really doesn't matter which way the feeder wires go, just as long as power from the bus comes in. So here is a connector that will go to my bus for the black side. And we'll do the same thing again for the red wire. And we'll make a similar size connector. Now I can trim these up later once the bus wires are actually in and we can connect all this stuff with suitcase connectors. But I'm just going to coil these and set them out of the way so they don't get hung up on anything for the time being. Now, I've got all these green wires left hanging under here, and we want to neaten those up because eventually there's going to be a lot of wire running through this layout for signal systems, power buses, and the like. So using my cable tagging staple gun, I'm just going to take little groups of these wires and make sure that they are locked down in place so they don't catch anything else. I got this guy that's sort of hanging free here. We can tie him down too. Remember, these staples are like little croquet wickets. They work great for holding small wires like this down. This little guy can just be stapled right next to his connection point. And then I've got one more set of wires up here that we should lock in. Something about like that. All right, just like that, we've got all of our frogs now for our staging yard powered through the frog juicer. We're just waiting for the bus to come in, and then we can make the final connection, and those will be ready to go. Also today, I've managed to get 5 of my Tortoise switch motors set up for operation of our staging yard. Now Ben will come back later and he'll do the final wiring so that we can run those through the control panel or through the signal system. But that leaves this guy right here. Why don't I have a Tortoise switch motor there? Well, you can see it's not going to fit right in order to operate that turnout. So if the Tortoise doesn't fit in that location because of the way the benchwork is built, how are we going to operate that turnout? Well, we need a thing called a remote Tortoise mount. Now that's a fairly involved installation, and it's something that I haven't necessarily tackled before, but have been dying to use one ever since I saw the product come on the market, and that is our next video.